Yuval Noah Harari wrote, and I read this to you at the time, in April of last year, about Donald Trump creating a world of rival fortresses. The surprising thing about Donald Trump's policies, he wrote, is that people are still surprised by them. Headlines express shock and disbelief whenever Trump assaults another pillar of the global liberal order. At the time, the best example was his support for Russia's claims for Ukrainian territory, or his contemplation of the forced annexation of Greenland, or the unleashing of financial chaos with his tariff announcements. And you have to sort of recognise that there is nothing surprising anymore about what he does. And sadly, there is nothing surprising about the desperate contortions undertaken by the people who love his moral corruption, who love his disgusting attitudes and behaviours, to defend his latest conduct. Because I don't know today, let's start where we ended last year, I don't know who has rendered themselves more ridiculous in their attempts to defend Donald Trump. It is either Nigel Farage, who you probably have heard of, or a chap called Richard Littlejohn, who writes columns in the Daily Mail. They have scaled, frankly, extraordinary heights of absurdity in their inability to criticise Donald Trump, even as the evidence of his awfulness, well, even as all of his critics are proved completely and eternally right about everything. If you are built a certain way, if your psychology is sufficiently flawed, you can never climb down from a position that you've adopted. So you end up having to defend everything, up to and including, presumably, whatever it is in the Epstein files that he remains so desperate to keep secret that he's ended up invading a foreign sovereign country. Almost on the day, actually, that he was required to produce the goods or to lift the final sort of limits on those disclosures. So Yuval Noah Harari has, like many people, but he perhaps expresses himself best, been calling this out for years and been pointing it out and been describing every single facet, every aspect of it in beautiful, almost poetic terms. And on it goes, the annexation of Venezuela, effectively. Mario Puzo, all right, probably the least obvious character on this list. Mario Puzo, as you probably know, is the author of The Godfather. I watched the first two, the only two, really, Godfather films over the holiday period, and was reminded of two things, both of which came into very sharp focus when Donald Trump illegally invaded Venezuela. The first was, and kidnapped the president. The first was, do you know, I nearly said then, no one's going to mourn much for the passing of Maduro's political career, but you don't do that. That way madness lies. You are not allowed to invade foreign countries and kidnap the president. It doesn't matter how awful he is. It doesn't matter whether or not he tortures kittens or pulls the wings off butterflies. It does not. None of it matters. You just don't do it any more than you pardon people, just to jump ahead slightly, who are serving 45-year sentences for trafficking cocaine while president of foreign countries. It's just not allowed. So you don't caveat your support for international law by saying, well, this time, the guy they broke international law for, he was a bit of a wrong. That's not how law works, right? You don't, for example, say, well, do you know what? If the police want to kick down someone's door and string him up from the nearest lamppost because they know he's a wrong 'un, even though they haven't been able to prove it in a court of law, then, yeah, that's all right. I'll look the other way. And do you know why this matters? Do I have to explain? Because next time it could be you. That's all. Next time it could be your country that gets illegally invaded because the president says it's the right thing to do, or because they have decided that the leader of your country is a wrong 'un. One newspaper today has Greenland on its front page. The possibility of Greenland, European territory, being next. What is it that the leader of Greenland has done that constitutes justification for an epic breach of international law? I'll wait. So the idiots, and I use the word very kindly, the idiots trying to defend what Donald Trump has done are ignoring several things, not least, of course, international law. But Mario Puzo, and it makes the second volume of the movie, this, Pre-Revolutionary Cuba. There's also a brilliant book, the name of the author, it might be Rachel Kushner, called Telex from Cuba or Telex from Havana. It's a brilliant book. I often find, as you know, fiction is a really helpful guide through facts, particularly through history. But if you take them in conjunction with each other, watching Godfather 2, and thinking about pre-revolutionary Cuba. There's a scene, I'm pretty sure, I may have slightly misremembered it, but Hyman Roth, who's I don't want to do spoilers, even though the book's been out for the best part of 50 years, if not more than 50 years, actually. But Hyman Roth is a major character and a big player in the illegal gambling, prostitution scene, which is the focus of enormous American interests in pre-revolutionary Cuba. So if you like, your legitimate businesses, they had sugar sewn up, probably a bit of oil as well, actually. But essentially, the country was like a farm, a money farm for American interests, both legal and illegal. The legal would be handling the sugar trade. The illegal would be handling the gambling and the prostitution, and quite possibly narcotics as well. And Hyman Roth is talking to Michael Corleone, and dreams of the day when they have somebody in the White House who is as sympathetic to their ambitions as the then president of Cuba was. I mean, he wasn't actually long for this world, Batista, at the time that the film is set, and the revolution occurs during the passage of the story. But the point was that they had a president in place in Cuba who would let them do whatever they wanted. So sitting around the table, you have the oil companies and the sugar companies, but you also have the mafiosi. They give him a golden telephone. That also resonated with me when you think of the gifts that people have been handing to Donald Trump over the last couple of years. They give the president of Cuba, the incredibly corrupt, incredibly venal, incredibly greedy, unbelievably self-interested president of Cuba, a golden telephone. And he passes it around. But the point is that sitting around the table are vested interests of epic wealth who have in their pocket a president who will do whatever they want. So I found myself thinking about that a little bit, because Hyman Roth says shortly afterwards, imagine when we get this from the White House. Imagine when we have our guy in the White House and he is going to be as sympathetic to our causes as the guy that we've now got in charge in Cuba. And then I was reminded of a comment Donald Trump made it when he was still in campaign mode, inviting $1 billion worth of donations from the oil companies upon the promise that he'd give them something brilliant. And he's now giving them Venezuela. So that was point two. That's Yuval Noah Harari describing what the world was going to look like when you had rival fortresses, when the rules-based order had gone out of the window, and when there was an essentially accepted reality under which you can do whatever the hell you want if you're strong enough. No one will be cheering louder this week than Vladimir Putin and Deng Xiaoping and Xi, the Chinese leader, because they are being told that their tactics, whether it is in Ukraine actually or Taiwan potentially, their tactics are not only going to be given a green light or going to be ignored by the US, but the US is now pursuing identical policy positions. So that's the world that we inhabit. And then the lesson from history, pre-revolutionary Cuba, and the dreams of vested interests, whether legal or illegal, of actually having governments who act entirely and exclusively in the interests of wealth, not in the interests of the people in the country. Then you've got what for me is probably the biggest card in this deck. You've got a chap called Juan Orlando Hernandez, a former president of Honduras. He was, until very recently, just getting stuck into a 45-year sentence for cocaine trafficking. So you're going to hear the phrase narco-terrorism a lot. You're going to hear the idea that that Maduro, the deposed Venezuelan president, was involved in the drug trade. Probably true, irrelevant to the importance of international law. But you're going to hear that a lot as a rationale from the idiots, as we're going to be calling them all year, from the idiots, from the Trump apologists, from the fascist-adjacent commentators. They're going to be pretending that this is all... In fact, one guy in the Mail, Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail, tries to compare this to the people smuggling gangs crossing the English Channel. You write an entire page without mentioning the former president of Honduras, who was serving a 45-year sentence for cocaine trafficking, until Donald Trump pardoned him. Imagine writing an entire page of words about your fever dream, your weird fetishistic fantasy that Donald Trump is such a tough guy that he is going to whip everybody into shape because he's doing it for the right reasons. He's doing it for moral reasons. He's clamping down on drug traffickers. Imagine writing that for your readers, all 11 of them, without mentioning that he gave a pardon to a former president of Honduras who was literally convicted in a literal American court of cocaine trafficking, received a 45-year sentence. So it doesn't matter how far you bend backwards, it doesn't matter how Gordian the knot is that you tie yourself into, you cannot possibly justify on any imaginable level, what Donald Trump has done in Venezuela, if you acknowledge the existence of Juan Orlando Hernandez. You just can't do it. You can't even begin to pretend that you're not completely corrupt, dishonest, intellectually bankrupt if you acknowledge his existence. So the only way you can do this is by not acknowledging his existence. It's a bit like John Cleese and the Second World War in that seminal episode of Fawlty Towers. Don't mention the Honduran president. We can pretend that Donald Trump's not all of the things that his critics, old Trump derangement syndrome people, have told us that he is. He's not riding roughshod over international law. He's not riding roughshod over democratic norms. He's not probably focusing on Greenland next. He's none of those things. He's not a sort of fascistic despot in embryonic form. He's none of those things. And we can pretend. Just don't mention the guy he gave the pardon to. Answers on a postcard, please, as to why he would give a pardon to a former Honduran president serving a 45-year sentence for cocaine trafficking. You might find the answer to that in Mario Puzo's work. So that's piece number 3. And then piece number 4 is Fiona Hill, the brilliant, I don't know how you describe her, I mean, academic, civil servant, Russia expert, and her memories, which she shared with Congress when Trump was being impeached. You can't make this stuff up, can you? Her memories of the first Trump administration's plans, if you like, for Venezuela. The idea that there is anything surprising about what has happened or anything admirable, decent, or indeed to be welcomed. Fiona Hill was there during the first administration and described not only the ambitions to do it for the oil, first, second, third, for the oil, and what was likely to follow. We're going back to 2019 when Fiona Hill, former US ambassador to Ukraine, testified to Congress that Russia was signalling very strongly that they wanted to somehow make some very strange swap agreement between Venezuela and Ukraine. In other words, the US could have Venezuela if we let Russia have Ukraine. The suggestion being that the price for letting the US go after Venezuela without any protest was and will be Ukraine. It was also suggested that Taiwan may already be on the table as a bargaining chip with China in order to secure its acquiescence to further US regional hegemony in the Americas. So that's why Nigel Farage is the other contender for stupidest observer of the week, him claiming that this will somehow upset the leaders of China and Russia. Donald Trump behaving just like the leaders of China and Russia will really put the heebie-jeebies on the leaders of China and Russia, says the daftest man in British politics. So I'll leave you to decide who is stupidest. The Daily Mail columnist writing paeans of praise to Donald Trump without mentioning the existence of the actual cocaine trafficker he pardoned just months into a 45-year sentence, or the politician claiming that Donald Trump is going to scare men like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping by behaving exactly like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. What I want you to tell me is what our leaders should be doing. That's it. You now understand what is going on. I mean, however much you've been swallowing your granddad's Daily Mail regurgitations or listening to people who haven't got a clue about what is really going on and care even less, or whether or not you just haven't really been properly engaged, like, you now know exactly what is going on. There is your trademarked JOB guide to the invasion of Venezuela, the deposing of the president via Yuval Noah Harari, Mario Puzo, Juan Orlando Hernandez and Fiona Hill, with a few little tiny contributions from me. So where the hell does that leave Keir Starmer? Genuinely, where does it leave Keir Starmer? Donald Trump is behaving like a medieval monarch, an empire, a completely corrupt dictator, a Putin, a Xi Jinping. He is behaving with utter disregard, with contempt for democratic norms and international law. Spoiler alert, Keir Starmer knows this. Keir Starmer understands this better than almost anybody in Britain because this was his profession at one point. Keir Starmer and everybody in his inner circle fully understand the gravity, the awfulness, the depravity of what Donald Trump is doing. But that doesn't mean he can say so. It really doesn't mean he can say so. It's almost like a Faustian pact or some sort of Greek tragedy what's happened to Keir Starmer. It's got a touch of the sort of Sunak's to it. You dream of power, and then when you get it, it's absolutely awful. He has to go to bed tonight. He had to go to bed last night knowing that what Donald Trump has done is objectively disgusting, criminal, internationally. I mean, he's a 34-time felon, you know. The man incited an insurrection, lied, tried to steal an election. No one can be surprised by what he's doing. But Keir Starmer knows. Keir Starmer gets it inside out. He's not pretending for professional reasons, like the Daily Mail columnist who kind of has to because he's climbed so far up Trump's backside he can't get down again without getting vertigo. He doesn't have to pretend for professional reasons that Trump is anything other than an election-stealing, insurrection inciting, sued a woman, of course, for libel who accused him of rape and lost. Make of that what you will. Boasts about his own sexual offending, of course, in what Nigel Farage describes as locker room talk. Keir Starmer knows exactly what he is. Always has done, always will do. But what can he do? Donald Trump is making almost all of George Orwell's predictions about the West come true in real time on television. But the idea, just pause for a minute, and you can't complain about the length of this introduction because I've been off for 2 weeks and you know what happens. Just think for a second about the front page of the Daily Telegraph this morning, which literally, and I know it's a bit of a comic on the comment pages, but the news pages and the foreign editing is still pretty strong. Trump sets sights on Greenland. It's 2025. The President of the United States of America is openly coveting sovereign European territory and minded to deploy precisely the same illegal tactics to annex it that he has just done in Venezuela. You've got Daily Mail columnists so bent morally, intellectually, I don't know what other ways, that they're trying to defend it. You've got UK politicians like Nigel Farage almost trying to praise it. You've got a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who is too terrified of the consequences to criticise it or even to describe it accurately. And you've got, I mean, I don't know what else you've got. You've probably got people trying to turn this into a problem for the leftists in the Labour Party who liked Chavez. It's all their fault, but that's what Keir Starmer really should be worrying about. It's all there. Those are the facts. This is the only analysis you need. Those are the simple facts of the matter. It's 2025 and the President of the United States of America, 2026, text! So at least we don't write checks anymore. Number of pizzas I bought in early January when I was a student with a year out of date check. It's 2026. I'm going to write that down in front of me in very big letters. Thank you, Keith. You've already earned your crust for this year. 2026. And the President of the United States of America is openly coveting sovereign European territory. His cheerleaders in this country are queuing up to praise his illegal invasion of a foreign country, his installation of the deputy of the man he's got rid of, which tells you exactly how concerned he was about the nature of the regime that was in place. The money was just flowing in the wrong direction. And our Prime Minister has to decide how to play this. There's no debate about what I've just described, by the way. There's no, what do you think of the invasion? Are you in favour or against international law? That's cowardice. That's the conversation of quislings. That's like talking about Hitler going into Sudetenland, or talking about whether who was right, Neville Chamberlain or Winston Churchill. That's madness. That's the way of cowards and traitors. Trump is disgusting. Trump is now doing on the world stage what you would expect the worst kind of corrupt dictator to do. And he's doing it in plain sight. He's doing it in full knowledge that some of the people that cheered him into the White House are so invested that they can never climb down from the ludicrous positions they've adopted. The job of the rest of us is to respond to that reality, not to question whether it's real or not, but to respond to that reality. And the job of Keir Starmer is to do it soon and to do it well.